Hey everybody, Pete Gluzak here for Bass University TV, and I want to talk to you about two of my favorite rods, my crankbait rods. If you're like me, you love crankbait fishing, and man, I love it. I love doing it for largemouth, spotted bass, smallmouth especially. It's one of my favorite ways to catch bass, and Cashion Rods has built two rods that I really like for a couple different applications. And the first one is the John Cruz. These are both John Cruz models, by the way. Good job, John. I really like the work that you did with these, along with the guys at Cashion. But this is the square bill crankbait rod. It's a 7-foot rod. It's got a, it's got perfect length handle. It's got a beautiful crankbait soft rod action that I really like, because when you're dealing with treble hooks, especially with number 4s, number 6s, you want a rod that's going to flex, have a parabolic bend. You want a rod that's going to keep those hooks pinned, not tear them out of the fish's mouth. It's so important when you're crankbait fishing. If you're losing fish on a crankbait, if you're having trouble, the first place you want to look to is your fishing rod. And I want to invite you to try the John Cruz square bill rod. Now I've got this rigged with a wiggle wart. I like using this rod for all types of shallow, medium shallow running crankbaits. Wiggle wart goes 6-8 feet. We've square bills. It's a terrific rod for all of those applications. So I want you to try that out. I typically am going to use a 7-to-1 gear ratio reel on it. I love that fast cranking action. I can make that bait burn and I can slow it down. But when that fish strikes, you can't beat that high-speed reel for building energy into the rod and helping you land those fish. So it's a dynamite little tool. Lines, cranking lines, I go from 8-pound test gamma fluorocarbon all the way up to 20-pound test in some cases. The thinner the line is going to help me get it down to the maximum running depth. It's also going to help me get the maximum vibration out of my lures. So the thinner line, more vibration, more depth. The fatter line is going to give me shallower running baits. It's going to allow that bait to run a little bit shallower, and that's what I like about using that heavier line. And it also picks up a lot quicker. When you're fishing shallow, you want to burn those baits. 20-pound test, 16-pound test line comes in so fast, you can really burn those square bills, which I like to do sometimes. Dynamite rod, 7 foot, lets me have great pinpoint casting, and I love that. So definitely a great rod for square bills, medium running crankbaits. Now, this is a specialty rod that I really like. And this is the deep cranking rod. And man, I love this. This is 7 foot, 11 inches of rod. It's huge, right? It's a long, long rod. But what's that going to do for me? Number one, it's going to give me a powerful cast. I'll be able to get much more distance on this rod than I will others because of its extra length. I can cast those baits really far. So when I need to get a bait down to its maximum running depth, this is your choice right here. Some other things I really like about this rod is it helps me put a lot of pressure on the fish. It's got an extra foot of length almost, and it really, you can move a lot of line. You can keep that crankbait pinned against the fish's mouth, and that's what we want to do. So I love these rods. Again, I'm using a high-speed reel. In situations where I'm using a DT20, I might go down to a 6-to-1 gear ratio, sometimes even a 5-to-1 when I want to get those baits down really deep. But I really love the 7-to-1 gear ratio in most of my crankbait fishing. Now, I like also using this on a square bill, and here's why. This is a great weapon to be able to make long casts with your square bill, cover massive amounts of shoreline, and with its rod height, now I can move that bait. I can get a sharp angle on the crankbait, so I can move that bait through the habitat really well. Keep it coming through treetops, keep it coming through heavy cover without getting hung up. I love that about this. And also when you get well, here's another thing I like to do, and you'll see me doing this whenever you see me fishing a crankbait. I love to pitch and flip my crankbait. It's not done by a lot of guys, but when you're in tight quarters, a roll cast is even too complicated to get it into the heavy stuff where I like to put my square bill crankbaits. So flipping it, pitching my crankbaits is something I like to do, and that extra length allows me to really get a good distance, good accuracy when I'm pitching my crankbait. Not to mention so much length to keep those fish pinned. So these are my cranking Cashion rods. I love them. I think you're gonna love them too. Give them a try. I'm gonna get out on the water right now and I'm gonna do some cranking. We'll see what we can do. I'm Pete Gluzak for Cashion Rods and Bass University TV.